That is the tension point where we're going to start with our group chat. I want to bring in MS Now's Eugene Daniels, who is on the ground in Chicago, John Harwood, veteran Washington correspondent and Duke University Distinguished Fellow, Nayyera Haq, former State Department senior advisor and former White House senior director, and Joel Payne, Democratic strategist and former senior aide for Hillary for America. Absolute pros, one and all. But Eugene, you're on the ground, so I'm going to go to you first. Talk about the mood at this conference. You and I were talking on Way Too Early before you left about if they are seeing this as the start of a true realignment inside the Democratic Party, or if they still see themselves as the fringe trying to push the rest of the party out there.
It depends on who you ask which one of those things is true, right? I think they do feel like they have a lot of momentum after back alley, from Zoran and then everybody else who was one who's a DSA or DSA adjacent person. But also, they haven't really figured out whether or not they feel like they're insurgents within the Democratic Party or whether they're a separate party and different people do different things. I was talking to a Tempe, Arizona councilman who sits in a seat that is, there's no political affiliation, but he is a DSA member. And the thing that I thought was most interesting is the understanding, as we all do, that if you want to change a party, right, like if you want to get in there and change it, you do have to convince a lot of people. And there's some frustration with mainstream Democrats that there is not a lot of convincing coming from the left. There's a lot of finger wagging at them. And I think that is something that they're going to have to contend with. And also at the end of the day, establishment Democrats have left this. The only reason the insurgency can happen is because of them. Have they been making sure that voters were getting what they wanted after they elected folks? If they were making sure that they were listening to voters who wanted fighters and wanted to see something change within their lives, you wouldn't see these folks winning. And I think that is the thing that the establishment has to contend with as the DSA is here meeting. I will also point out, it's not a convention in the way that we typically think of them. This is more like a rules committee meeting for the DNC, because there's like 900 people here, not a ton of speeches. A lot of learning, they say, is going to happen here.
One quick question, Eugene, before I take this to the table. Do the folks that you're talking to at the DSA consider themselves Democrats?
Some do. Some of them see themselves as Democrats. But what you will hear both from people here, but also people like Bernie Sanders, that the only way to actually win is to do it through the Democratic Party, right? And so some of them consider themselves Democrats. Many of them, I think, especially the younger ones, see themselves as DSA members first, who have to work within a system that in their eyes is built to make sure that the left cannot succeed. But they have to work within the system that they are in while working to change it.
And I think, Joel, it is that natural tension point that Eugene is referencing there about what does it actually constitute? And this is something, frankly, that I've asked Abdul El-Sayed, who is running in Michigan. When does the Democratic Party end and the Democratic Socialist Movement begin? Or are they just one and the same, and one is just pulling more toward the left than the other?
Yeah, I also think it's important. I mean, I think the idiosyncrasies between the different parts of the left is important, too. Like Eugene alluded to, that there's DSA, there's DSA adjacent, there's DSA friendly. And I think the thing that sometimes people miss is how much organization and how much, real thought and power goes into the muscularity behind this movement. Like, these are not just folks who are like hobbyists. Yeah. Like, these are folks who are building real political power. They're very invested in it. If you look at the places where these DSA candidates have been successful, door knocking, phone calls, like real organization, they've been able to turn folks out. So yes, the energy behind their ideas is very, very, present. But also the organization and the thought behind putting a political movement together, that shouldn't be missed.
To Joel's point, this idea of movement building and door knocking, connecting with real people, right? Real people. It's something the Democratic Party used to be known for, right? Union organizing, people power. And in that Clinton, Biden, liberal era, so many folks on the ground felt that was lost, and that connectivity at a very deep community level.
You're Obama there?
Well, I mean, I did work for the Obama administration, so thank you for noting that. But Obama did have this kind of maverick element in that. I mean, he was not supposed to run at that time. That was supposed to be the Hillary election, and he came forward, right? He was also younger. And so it's some of that Obama energy that crossed party lines, frankly. The majority of Americans are unaffiliated at this moment, right? They've rejected party labels. And so whether, as you said, whether it's DSA or something else, this is the way that you reignite a big tent and you get more people into a bigger movement, as long as, again, establishment folks understand that they need to be moving forward and not holding on to power from a previous era.
And I understand why we are talking about it, and I think rightly so, as this establishment wing of the people who have been political practitioners in Washington for a while versus these more insurgent candidates who are running as outsiders at a time where the system is not very popular. But, John, I'll pose to you what one of our viewers, Dorothy in Maryland, is saying. Why won't the Democrats just focus on policies and stop the divisive conversation of moderates versus something else?
Well, I think they will if they get power. They're going to focus on policies, but this is the time when factions fight each other. I do think the relevant point is the one that you made in the initial question to Joel. I believe this is directional. It's not about socialism per se or democratic Socialists of America. The views espoused by the head of the Democratic Socialists for America, who was on television recently, are held by a minuscule number of people. Abolish the Pentagon, abolish the police forces.
Get rid of the Senate, defund the police.
Yeah, that stuff is fringy, going nowhere stuff. The point is directional. It's about aggression and fighting and trying to get more done. It's basically a more government help for people. That's what people who call themselves democratic socialists, that's what they want. And that's what they hope to get if Democrats take over.
You can. And I also just want to add to whatever you're going to add. Is it helpful or harmful for the head of the Democratic Socialists of America to go on Fox over the weekend and say, yeah, these are our points. We want to abolish the Senate. We want to defund the police. I mean, is that helpful, harmful, neither?
I mean, just as harmful as it is for establishment Democrats to talk about older positions on the Middle East and not reform those positions as well. I mean, there are a lot of unpopular positions that people hold in political coalitions. The other thing I would add here is, and this is to that point, I mean, I understand the DSA label is, it can be applied in a toxic fashion. You know, it also can be applied in a toxic fashion. Democrat, because it might actually be more harmful to your brand right now in some parts of the country to be labeled a Democrat than to be labeled someone who's friendly with DSA. And that is the ugly truth that Democrats actually have to face, is that this stuff is very complex. These things are moving. The ground is moving beneath our feet. And I think instead of being dogged in your old positions, I think Democrats should be open-minded to what the coalition can look like.
John, how much of this is a backlash to Trump?
Well, everything in politics right now is a backlash to Trump. And it's why I think the point that Joel is making about the Democratic brand, sure, that's true. People don't like the Democratic brand. Republicans don't like it. Many Democrats don't like it. That's not the relevant factor for this election. Donald Trump and what his administration is doing is the factor in this election. I do have to disagree with Joel in the sense that when you said, is it helpful for that person to go on Fox? I think it is not helpful. I don't know how much not helpful it is. I'm not sure how many people really absorb what's going on that particular television program. But to the extent that anyone associates Democrats with those positions, I think those are qualitatively worse than whatever Democratic position is on the conflict in the Middle East, for example.
Yeah, if you're watching Fox News to understand the Democratic Party, you already...
I agree with you.
Right? Like, you already have a certain perspective, so it's, okay, great, go preach to the people who already hate Democrats. But there is that idea, and this is where I bring up the Biden era, of how that many people in the progressive left thought that this was an opportunity post-Trump to make big swings, make big changes. And the answer that, we got often from the White House and indeed also from the Attorney General at the time was, let's norm harder. Let's get back to the systems and processes we've already had. And this is where this faction and this entire movement is coming out of a reaction to things were already broken. Trump blew a hole through all of the things that we thought existed and people did just because you're supposed to do them. So let's take this opportunity to think about things differently. And that wasn't what centrist, moderate Democrats did for 4 years. And that's some of the anger is it wasn't a fight. It wasn't reworking. It wasn't looking at what's next for our new generation, the rising generation. And yes, then they blame that administration for the second coming of Trump.
I would just
I
offer
think
a
you're
counter,
right, and I
though.
like norm as a verb.
You can't norm harder.
But I will say, just as a counter to that, the Biden administration did do things. They ran as moderates, certainly, but they did things with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and others when it came to attempting to cancel student loan debt. They were able to do some of it, but the courts stopped other parts of it, right? I mean, like, there were attempts to be more progressive.
And so I think the 2 points where they lost some of what should have been the base was the criminal justice reform and not willing to bust the filibuster to get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed, allowing the Voting Rights Act to expire. Again, things very deeply important to the black voters in the coalition and a younger generation of black voters, and Middle East messaging, right? This is Obama had already boxed in Netanyahu and brought the Democratic leadership along. And this was a return. What Biden did was a return to a much older era of what was going on in the Middle East, where, it was still the Yasser Arafat mindset of that's who we're dealing with Palestinians versus the realities of a Netanyahu administration.